Right, so we're moving now on to architecture change management, which really doesn't look at change management in the broader spectrum, but just around how we manage change within the architectural discipline. In other words, change to our architectural framework and our architectural outputs. All right, so we're back with the ADM. We've traveled through a fairly long path to arrive at this point. Once again, just reinforcing how we draw out the ADM, just so it's fairly clear to each of you. Now, if you recall, implementation governance was phase G. We're now looking at phase H, right, which is architecture change management. Now, the architecture change management actually falls part of two iterations. It falls part of the governance iteration, which is governing both the implementation of the architecture as well as the actual architectural feedback about the architecture. So let me just be a little more clear on that. If I'm governing the deliverable of architecture down here, and we spoke about the realization iteration there, okay? But if I'm up here and I'm governing within the H phase, I'm governing architecture itself. In other words, well, are the principles for architecture accurate? Is this model accurate? Is there a reference model that we could have used that could have been better? You know, is there a gap in how we did architecture? Is the process working for us? All of those pieces are what you're going to identify in the H phase. Right, but also bearing in mind that there's an iteration here called the architecture capability iteration, which has two aspects to it. One, it iterates through these two phases here, as we saw in the beginning, but it also iterates through the preliminary phase and architecture change management. And the reason it does that is in the preliminary phase is where you set up your capability for doing architecture. In other words, your architecture team. And some of the changes which are going to be coming out of the spin of this ADM wheel might have an impact on, well, you need to change this about your architecture team because it's really not being effective. And really that relates to the different types of change that you would get. So you could get coming out of an implementation. So let's say down here we have delivery. All right, so there are a variety of projects, and as we're going through a cycle of governing them and ensuring through reviews, governance reviews, that they're delivering against the architecture, as we're going through those phases, they might bubble up certain information to us saying, well, there's problems with this architecture, this isn't quite working. And some of those are small enough to be called an incremental change, right, which means that we just make a small change to the architecture. Some of them are significant, which could mean that we might need to spin another change of the wheel. So in essence, an incremental change is going to sit over here, because I'm just within this iteration here, I'm going to be just effecting change on the delivery. But if something big enough bubbles to the top and we have a significant type of change, well, actually what that's going to do is it's going to spin off another wheel. So hopefully you can see this coming off this way, and that goes into another architecture vision, and we spin it through the wheel again. And then finally there's over and above the significant changes, and an architectural type change, almost an architectural transformational type change, if one wants to look at it that way, which really then goes back up into the preliminary phase of the top here and says something is not right within how you do architectural. Your architectural building blocks are wrong, the concerns or viewpoints that you've developed, they're all wrong, and they need to be changed. So those are sort of three aspects of change management. So, you know, bearing in mind when we talk about architecture change management, we're not talking about changing the organization. In other words, the process of getting people to change, moving from one particular state of business to another state of business. It's a separate discipline. Here we're talking about just managing and changing the architectural aspects of your organization. The inputs, the outputs, the method, the techniques, some of the contracts across sort of three levels: delivery, across spinning out another significant wheel, and across actually altering the architectural framework, so to speak.